When people think about failure, they often imagine it as a wall, an obstacle that blocks the path forward and signals that the journey is over. This is one of the most destructive illusions of modern life. Failure is not the end of the road. In fact, it is the very beginning. It is the raw material from which growth is forged, the doorway through which persistence enters, and the foundation upon which true success is built. Failure feels like death to the ego. It exposes weakness, it humiliates, it makes you question your worth, your talent, and sometimes even your identity. And that is why so many people give up the moment they face it. They mistake failure for a verdict rather than a lesson. They confuse it with a permanent label, I am not good enough, instead of seeing it for what it truly is. Feedback from you. Think about it. Every time you fail, the world is giving you information. It is revealing the gap between your effort and your execution, between your plan and reality. That gap is not your enemy, it is your teacher. If you pay attention, it shows you exactly where to grow. But only if you are humble enough to see failure not as proof of inadequacy, but as instruction. The great inventors and thinkers of history understood this principle deeply. Thomas Edison famously said he had not failed 1,000 times when trying to create the light bulb. He had simply found 1,000 ways that did not work. That is not rhetoric, it is a way of seeing failure that transforms despair into progress. Each failed attempt brought him closer to the truth, closer to the design that eventually illuminated the world. If Edison had treated his early failures as the end, darkness would have remained. Because he saw failure as the beginning, the world changed. The same is true in every sphere of life. Athletes who miss the winning shot, writers who face rejection after rejection, entrepreneurs whose first ventures collapse, all of them face a choice. They can take failure as a final judgment and walk away, or they can treat it as the first step in a deeper journey. Those who persist understand that success is rarely immediate. It is almost always preceded by layers of failure that prepare the mind, toughen the will, and sharpen the strategy. The reason failure is the beginning is because it burns away illusions. Before you fail, you imagine that the path will be easy, that effort will immediately translate into reward. Failure destroys that illusion and forces you into reality. It humbles you. It reminds you that nothing great comes cheaply. And in that humility lies power, because humility makes you teachable. The arrogant cannot learn from failure. They quit or they blame, but the humble pause, reflect, and try again, wiser than before. There is also something paradoxically energizing about failure when seen correctly. Failure tells you that you are attempting something real, something difficult. If you never fail, it means you are not stretching far enough. You are living safely within the boundaries of mediocrity. But when you fail, you are pressing against the edges of your potential. Failure is the evidence that you are in the arena, not watching from the sidelines. It is proof of courage, not weakness. Of course, none of this means failure feels pleasant. It doesn't. It hurts, it discourages, it leaves scars. But those scars are not signs of defeat. They are marks of experience. Every failure carves something into you, a lesson, a resilience, a new perspective, and over time, those scars become your strength. The person who has failed many times and risen again is stronger than the one who has never fallen. Because strength is not built in comfort, it is built in the fire of failure. One of the most dangerous cultural messages today is the obsession with instant success. Social media glorifies the highlight reel, the breakthrough moment, the sudden triumph. What it does not show are the years of failed attempts, the nights of doubt, the endless trials behind the scenes. And so people are misled. They think failure is abnormal, when in reality it is universal. The truth is that every story of success is beneath the surface. So a story of repeated failure refusing to let the end be the beginning. Start by asking a simple question: what did this failure teach me that success could not? Success feels good, but it rarely teaches. Failure, on the other hand, shines a spotlight on your blind spots. It reveals weaknesses you didn't see. It forces you to adapt. It strengthens your endurance. In other words, failure educates in a way success never can. If you treat each failure as a lesson, then every fall moves you forward. Another way is to separate your identity from your outcome. You are not your failure. You are the person who failed, yes, but also the person who can rise, adapt, and try again. When you internalize failure as your identity, I am a loser, you chain yourself to despair. When you externalize it, I experienced the setback, you free yourself to try again. The difference seems small, but it is everything. Identity either imprisons or liberates you. Ultimately, the truth is this: failure is not a wall, but a doorway. The people who achieve greatness are not those who avoided failure, but those who walked through it again and again until they reached the other side. Failure is not the end of the story. It is the chapter that makes the story worth telling. So when you stumble, when you fall, when your plans collapse and your efforts seem wasted, remember this: you are not finished. You are beginning. The only true failure is giving up. Everything else is the process of learning, growing, and moving closer to success. To fail is human, but to rise again, to begin anew, that is where greatness lives. Perseverance is more than a tactic for reaching goals. It is the crucible in which character is formed. Each time you persist in the face of difficulty, you reshape yourself. You become a different kind of person, stronger, wiser, more disciplined, and far less fragile. Where failure teaches you what does not work, persistence is the act of refusing to be destroyed by that lesson. It is the determination to keep walking forward even when the path is heavy with resistance. Many people think of persistence merely as not quitting, but that definition is too shallow. Persistence is not passive, it's active endurance. It is the willingness to show up again and again with focus, discipline, and resilience even when the results are invisible. To persist is to confront the inner voice that says, "It's hopeless, stop now, this is pointless." It is to answer that voice with action rather than surrender. What happens inside a person who persists is extraordinary. At first, persistence feels like you struggle, you sweat, you meet rejection, and it seems as if life is mocking you. But slowly, persistence rewires your mind. It begins to alter your relationship with struggle. What once terrified you becomes tolerable. What once felt unbearable becomes familiar. And in that familiarity lies strength. By persisting, you train your nervous system not to panic at adversity, but to see it as the normal terrain of growth. Consider the athlete who pushes through countless hours of training long before the roar of the crowd. Every repetition builds not only muscle, but character. Every painful session whispers to the mind, "You are stronger than you think." The same principle applies in all areas of life. The writer who faces blank pages day after day, the entrepreneur who rebuilds after a failed launch, the student who studies despite repeated mistakes, all of them are not merely inching toward their goal, they are becoming people of substance. This is why persistence is more valuable than talent. Talent without persistence evaporates. History is filled with gifted people who quit at the first obstacle and their talent died in silence. But persistence without talent, a persistent person may begin at the bottom, but through repetition, adjustment, and endurance, they climb higher than those who started above them. Persistence is the equalizer. It transforms ordinary individuals into extraordinary achievers. The beauty of persistence is that it compounds. Every time you persist, the next time becomes easier. It is like building a muscle. Each repetition strengthens you. At first, you may barely manage one step beyond your comfort zone, but over time, those steps accumulate. Eventually, persistence becomes part of your identity. You no longer ask yourself, "Can I continue?" You simply do. You don't flee at the sight of obstacles. You lean into them. That mindset shift is what separates those who rise from those who collapse. But persistence does more than help you achieve external success. It shapes your inner architecture. It forges virtues that no book, lecture, or motivational slogan can provide. Discipline, patience, humility, and courage, these are not gifts you are handed. They are the offspring of persistence. Every struggle you endure without quitting engraves these virtues into your character. When you persist, you are not only building toward your dream, you are also building the kind of person who can handle the weight of that dream once it arrives. It is worth asking, why do we admire heroes in stories? It is not because they had easy victories. It is because they persisted through impossible odds. The essence of every heroic narrative is persistence against dragons, against injustice, against despair. Deep down, we recognize this as truth. The hero's strength is not in his sword, but in his refusal to quit swinging it. And this mirrors real life. Our battles may not involve dragons, but they involve hardship, doubt, and endless obstacles. Persistence makes us heroic in the quiet, unseen ways. There is also a deeper spiritual dimension here. Persistence aligns you with reality. Life is inherently difficult. To demand that it be easy is to fight against the truth of existence. But when you persist, you accept reality as it is. You embrace struggle as the price of becoming. In doing so, you cultivate gratitude, not for comfort, but for the chance to grow. That is why persistent people radiate a kind of gravity. They are grounded, steady, and trustworthy. They have endured storms, and so they are no longer shaken by every gust of wind. Some people confuse stubbornness with persistence, but they are not the same. Stubbornness is blind refusal to change. Persistence, on the other hand, adapts. It learns from each setback, adjusts the approach, and keeps moving. True persistence is flexible. It bends without breaking. It is not a rigid insistence that my way must work, but a resilient commitment that a way will work, and I will find it. That flexibility makes persistence not only powerful, but wise. The cost of persistence is high, time, energy, emotional strain, but the reward is immeasurable. You don't just achieve more, you become more. Each act of persistence chisels away the weaker parts of you and reveals a stronger self underneath. And in the end, that transformation is far greater than the external victory. Because success may fade, trophies may gather dust, but the character forged through persistence endures for a lifetime. So when you find yourself tempted to quit, when progress feels invisible, when the weight of failure presses heavily, remember this: persistence is not just about finishing the race. It is about becoming the kind of person who cannot be broken by the race. Every time you persist, you are engraving strength into your soul. And one day, when success finally arrives, you will realize that the victory is not just in what you achieved, but in who you became along the way. One of the most discouraging experiences in life is working hard and seeing no visible results. You put in the hours, you make sacrifices, you endure failures, and yet on the surface, nothing seems to change. It feels like you are pouring water into a bottomless well, and that can be enough to make anyone quit. But here's the truth: progress is often invisible, and its nature is cumulative. It gathers quietly beneath the surface until one day it bursts forward in a way that looks sudden to everyone else, but was in reality the result of long seen persistence. Think of the way bamboo grows. For years after it is planted, nothing happens above the ground. You water it, nurture it, protect it, but there is no visible growth. It appears lifeless, and anyone who doesn't understand its nature might give up and declare it a failure. But beneath the soil, an entire network of roots is forming, strengthening, preparing. And then, when the time is right, the bamboo shoots upward at a speed that seems miraculous, growing feet in mere days. What looked like sudden success was actually years of invisible progress. The same principle applies to our lives. When you are trying to build a career, develop a skill, or pursue a dream, you may not see immediate evidence of growth. Your efforts may feel wasted because the visible markers of success, money, recognition, achievement, are absent. But what you cannot see are the invisible roots, the discipline being built, the skills sharpening, the mindset hardening, the character deepening. These are foundations, and like any true foundation, they are laid underground, out of sight. We live in a culture obsessed with quick results. Social media feeds us highlight reels, overnight successes, viral moments, sudden breakthroughs. What it does not show are the years of unnoticed work behind those moments. That illusion is dangerous because it convinces people that if progress is not instant, it is non-existent. But reality does not work like that. Progress is slow, incremental, often imperceptible in the moment. And that is why so many give up too soon. They abandon the roots just before the growth was about to break the surface. Now, the truth is, most meaningful transformations happen in silence. Consider the student who studies daily, even when the material feels overwhelming. At first, the knowledge doesn't seem to stick. But gradually, the concepts interconnect, and suddenly what once seemed impossible becomes effortless. The breakthrough was not sudden. It was the accumulation of hundreds of invisible hours. Or take the writer who struggles through draft after draft, none of them good enough. Then one day the words finally flow. Outsiders may say, "What talent?" But the writer knows it was persistence, not magic. Invisible progress is also what protects us from fragility. If success came instantly without struggle, it would destroy us. We would not have the strength of character to handle it. The unseen process, the failures, the doubts, the small adjustments, these are what make us capable of sustaining success when it finally arrives. The very slowness that frustrates us is the same slowness that fortifies us. Without it, success would collapse as quickly as it appeared. There is also a psychological depth here. The human brain is not good at perceiving small changes over time. It notices dramatic shifts, but ignores subtle growth. This is why we underestimate ourselves. We assume we are stagnant because we can't see immediate leaps. But in reality, every effort compounds. Every attempt, every failure, every lesson builds silently, like layers of sediment. One day the accumulation becomes visible. Progress feels sudden, not because it was absent before, but because it was hidden. This truth explains why many people look back years later and marvel at how far they've come. Day to day, it felt like nothing was happening. But over time, the invisible progress stacked up, and now the transformation is undeniable. This is why patience is inseparable from greatness. To achieve anything lasting, you must trust in the unseen. You must believe that your efforts are not wasted, even when your eyes cannot yet see their fruit. The tragedy is that most people quit during the invisible stage. They expect instant gratification, and when it doesn't come, they walk away. They abandon the field just before harvest. If only they had persisted a little longer, the breakthrough would have arrived. Success is rarely about genius. It is about endurance, enduring the invisible season long enough to see the explosion of progress. There's also something profound about how others perceive this process. When your breakthrough finally happens, people will call it luck. They will say, you were in the right place at the right time, but you will know better. You will know the sleepless nights, the endless failures, the years of invisible work that prepared you for that lucky moment. What looks like luck on the outside is usually invisible persistence on the inside. So the lesson is simple but not easy. Don't mistake invisibility for absence. Just because you can't see growth doesn't mean it isn't happening. Trust the process. Keep going. Keep watering the bamboo even when the soil looks empty. because progress is building beneath the surface, and when it finally breaks through, it will seem unstoppable. And when that explosion happens, when your effort suddenly bears fruit, it will not only surprise others, it will change you, because you will have learned the truth that most people never grasp. Greatness is not built in the spotlight. It is built in the shadows through invisible persistence until the day it finally bursts into the light. History does not always belong to the most talented, the most intelligent, or even the most fortunate. More often than not, it belongs to the one who simply refused to quit. The world is full of people with brilliant ideas and remarkable gifts who gave up when things became too difficult. Yet the names we remember, the inventors, the leaders, the athletes, the creators, are not always those who were exceptional from the start, but those who displayed relentless endurance. Victory, in its truest sense, belongs to the individual who refuses to surrender. This truth is uncomfortable because it strips away our excuses. We often tell ourselves that success is reserved for the lucky few, for those with natural talent, for those born into perfect circumstances. But the deeper reality is that persistence trumps talent and grit outlasts fortune. The one who refuses to quit keeps moving when everyone else has already turned back. Eventually, that perseverance leads to breakthroughs that others never see, simply because they did not last long enough to reach them. The greatest enemy of victory is not failure, it is resignation. Failure is inevitable, resignation is optional. Every person stumbles, every plan falters, every dream encounters resistance. The difference between the defeated and the victorious is not the absence of setbacks, but the refusal to let those setbacks dictate the end. Quitting is the only true defeat. As long as you rise again, as long as you keep moving forward, the possibility of a victory remains alive. Consider the lives of those who changed the course of history. Abraham Lincoln lost multiple elections before becoming president. Nelson Mandela spent decades in prison before leading his nation. Thomas Edison's experiments failed thousands of times before producing the light bulb. What unites these figures is not ease, but endurance. They each reached victory because they refused to quit, even when the cost was immense and the outcome uncertain. This principle applies to ordinary lives as much as it does to extraordinary ones. The parent who refuses to give up on their child, the student who refuses to abandon their education, the worker who keeps striving despite rejection after rejection, each is demonstrating the same timeless truth. Victory may not come quickly, but it will come to the one who endures longer than the opposition, longer than the obstacles, longer than their own doubts. Refusing to quit is not about stubbornness, it is about conviction. Stubbornness clings blindly to the same path, while conviction fuels adaptability. The one who refuses to quit is willing to change tactics, to learn new skills, to evolve strategies, but never to abandon the mission. This flexibility combined with resilience creates an unstoppable force. While others waste energy on excuses or retreat, the relentless individual keeps moving, even if the steps are small. And over time, those small steps compound into victory. There is also a psychological transformation that occurs when you refuse to quit. Every time you continue, despite exhaustion or discouragement, you train your mind to believe in your capacity. You build an identity rooted in resilience. Quitting, on the other hand, weakens your confidence. It teaches your brain that when things get hard, escape is the answer. Refusal to quit creates the opposite effect. It hardens your spirit, teaching you that you can survive difficulty and still advance. This shift in self-belief is one of the greatest victories of all. Because once you believe you are unbreakable, no obstacle can truly stop you. It's important to remember that the world often tests you most severely right before a breakthrough. Many victories are lost not because they were impossible, but because people quit just before the finish line. Success often requires enduring longer than seems reasonable, holding on when others insist it is hopeless. And when you finally push through, the reward is not only the achievement itself, but the realization that your endurance was stronger than your suffering. And there is a profound sense of dignity in refusing to quit. Even if the external reward takes years to materialize, the internal reward, the strength of character, the courage, the self-respect grows with every act of endurance. To know that you did not surrender when you could have, to look at yourself and say, I stayed in the fight. That is victory of a deeper kind, a victory that no one can take from you. So what does it mean to win? It means to outlast. It means to keep showing up long after others have walked away. It means refusing to let defeat have the final word. Victory belongs not to the one who never fell, but to the one who rose the most. The world bows not to the most gifted, but to the most relentless. In the end, victory is a crown that perseverance places upon your head. The applause may come later, the recognition may be delayed, but if you do not quit, it is inevitable. Because the truth is simple yet profound, talent shines brightly, but burns out if it quits. Brilliance fades if it surrenders, but persistence endures, and endurance always wins. Victory will never belong to the quitter. It will always belong to the one who refused to quit.